Cool. Well, we're live, and thank you for anybody who's in the chat. I see MJ is here, and thank you to Nathan and Travis for joining me on stream. I just got like a random chance to go live today, and figure I'd keep up with these open streams. So I don't really know exactly what we're going to talk about, but if anybody does want to join, I will put the Zoom link in the description of the video. I meant to do that, but I did not. I see you here, Eddie, with Brute Facts podcast. So thank you for joining. And yeah, if you just kind of want to introduce yourself a little bit, Nathan, just like your position, because it is a little, you kind of have been a little bit all over the place, and you've never been on my channel, so that would help people who have never seen your stuff, and kind of plug your channel and stuff, because I know you just got over 1,000 subscribers, or I don't know, you're getting more and more all the time. I know you've been streaming and making a lot of videos.
It's what at this point, it's kind of the algorithm now like actually does some promotion of my channel. I think when you hit like 1,000, so people start subscribing consistently. I think I've got a channel called Digital Gnosis, and over there I have some open conversations, I guess similar to what we're doing today. Some interviews with philosophers, theologians, mathematicians, various types of people, and occasionally I'll make a video on a topic, but not very often, because I'm lazy. I used to be, I became a Christian when I was around 20, 21, something like that. And then I was a Christian for around a year and a half before sort of leaving and becoming agnostic, which is the current position that I hold. And that is that's a brief introduction to me for people who don't know.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate it. Yeah, I feel like we've actually like hardly ever talked, but I'm always in your chats and stuff, so I feel like we've like had more conversations than we actually have. But yeah. I don't know exactly what we wanted to talk about here. I know I got Travis here too, who's been in here a bunch of times. So if anybody's not familiar with Travis, he doesn't have a channel, but he's been on my stream a bunch of times and done a number of debates. But
yeah, I'm just here at work, so I thought I'd just like hang out with you guys, see what we want to talk about, just whatever we want to do.
Yeah. I felt like there was something I was gonna ask Nathan, but this was like a while back, and I don't remember what it was, but whatever. Oh, I have been enjoying, actually, I watched the last one of your bad apologetics, or whatever in the world you call those, or whatever, and I thought the last one was, like, pretty good. Oh, yeah, on Eric Hernandez and the whole, like, substance dualism and stuff. Yeah, I don't know where I fall on that necessarily, but I thought that was really good. I think a lot of the points that, like, James makes on there are like, really, really good, and I think the whole like overblowing evidence and stuff is an issue for sure. And I think it's good what you're doing over there and kind of pointing out a lot of that stuff. I don't know how in the world you stream for 8 hours at a time. That blows my mind every time I see the length. But
I have a question.
Sorry, Trace. Do you mind if I just say, reply on that? Because I think I appreciate like because there's a few Christians who watch my stuff and agree that some of the apologetics we're engaging with, people are overstating the case in certain places, obviously disagree with us on some points, but I think it's good for people it helps improve the dialogue and get past like just the us versus them. Like you should, like if someone's got really horrible positions or like is really unethical or whatever, you shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to defend this idea even though it's clearly wrong just because they're like on the same team as me. And I think that's what we're trying to do as well. So we want to do like bad counter apologetics, for example, as well, because I guess like, I mean, maybe we jumped on calling it bad apologetics too soon, and that's like a bit too tribal of a title or whatever. But I think we wanted to point out that that's what's going on in these discussions all too often. It's just like, oh, how do we just like defend any old argument or whatever? Sorry to interrupt, Travis, if you had something to say.
Oh no, actually that kind of plays in with what I was going to say, because I think these kind of dialogues are really important. And like, I'm a theist. What's kind of interesting is I'm kind of the opposite. Like I was an atheist, but eventually became a theist because of the arguments. But I think you bring up a great point that a lot of these arguments I don't know if I'd say a lot, but like let's say the moral argument, I don't think it's convincing. And then like with something like substance dualism, you're going to lose out on simplicity. So now I kind of favor like a version of the contingency, the argument from mathematics, and the teleological arguments. But I think there are some arguments that just don't quite get us there. And I know personally, I wouldn't want to try and argue something that I'm not even convinced of.
Yeah, and I think something that Nathan points out, and he brought up this analogy, and it's like really sticks to me, that whole like Pokemon analogy that you've talked about, and how like people just like I see a lot of people basically just going around like collecting arguments and collecting philosophical ideas, like I hold to this and I have this that I know, and like I know like you in one of your videos, the guy like he said something and it just blew my mind. He said something along the lines of like, some days I can't even remember how to recite the Kalam, and I'm like, dude, like
yeah, that was it. Yeah,
like made me mad.
It's like an in-group test of faith or something. Yeah, like
I'm barely a Christian anymore. I can't even repeat the 3 premises that Craig points out in the Kalam. I'm like, dude, what? Like that has nothing to do with Christianity.
Ugh. Exactly. In fact, I'm a beather, so I don't even think the Kalam gets us anywhere.
Yeah, but like no matter what the argument is, like just the fact of that, like all you can do is like you just basically admitted that you just memorize the words and regurgitate them. So like clearly it doesn't convince the person who can't remember it. Hello, John, too.
Hey,
but
what's up?
Yeah.
Have you brought some evidence today, John? You brought some evidence for Jesus' existence.
Some clear evidence. Yeah. Yeah.
I have some good evidence. I'm a Christian. There you go. That's my evidence.
That was a rough one.
Oh yeah, you're talking about that stream with SJ.
With SJ. Yeah.
I was in the chat. Yeah, I was like texting John when that was happening. I was like, dude, I don't know. He like asked me if he should go on, and then he goes on, and there's like a crazy guy, and then a really mad Jesus mythicist. I'm like, whoa.
I've got to see that. I've got to see that.
Yeah, it turned into a mess real fast. But yeah. As far as I don't know exactly where we're going with this. Yeah, you just jumped in, John, so you gotta introduce the next topic.
Yeah, we got nothing.
Yeah. I guess we could. One thing that might be interesting to talk about is what is your guys' point of view on like arguing in this form of apologetics where you sort of like putting syllogisms out there and stuff. Like, what is the role of the syllogism from your point of view? Because I guess like for example, I think in a week's time, Cameron's got this like 86 arguments for God's existence, right? And it's like, well, are we just gonna? Well, part of the issue from my point of view is like, well, for a deductive argument to work, the premises are going to contain the conclusion somewhere in there, right? So if we're just going to start basically from premises that are part of like a theistic worldview and then conclude like God exists, it's like, am I meant to do that? Am I meant to just come up with like things that are part of my worldview that don't include God and just conclude therefore like God doesn't exist from them and do as many, like, is that going to be convincing to anyone? Is that useful? But then also like, it's like logic. It seems like it can be useful in some ways. Like if you've got no idea what I'm saying and I'm like, well, here's what I think it is. It's something like it's either this or this and it can't be that. So it must be that. So, like, so what do you guys think about that? What role should like logic, syllogism, and argumentation play in apologetics or evangelism?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that I think with me, I like to say that, I'm a theist or I believe in God because I think the evidence is more probable given theism, but I'm a Christian because of knowing Christ. So I kind of distinguish between the two, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense. And I've been all over the map when it comes to this for sure. Like, I don't know. So I like became a Christian clearly, and it had nothing to do with any sort of argumentation. It just was like, I just like got introduced to church basically. Like had no reason not to want to go and started going. And then all of a sudden, like, I just became a Christian. Like, it definitely wasn't because of any kind of arguments. It just was something that happened. And and there was like a little while where I was like, okay, this seems like I was pretty convinced that like I needed argumentation, or maybe I was being irrational and whatnot. But the more I like look into these arguments, it just seems like a never ending thing, back and forth, back and forth. And then I start to realize, like, I just don't think, like, I think they have their place. Maybe I'm not really like sure too much, but I wouldn't use any sort of like philosophical argument to convince, to like, for like evangelism or anything at all. I think that's much more about getting to know someone, and if they're interested, then they're interested. If they're not, then they're not. I'm not gonna use the kalam or contingency to like convince you. But I also think, like, you're right, like philosophy and logic and stuff has its place for sure. Like, it can prove things, or not really prove, but like whatever, can be used to like convince someone of different things or whatever. So yeah, I think John like can like, I don't know, I'm not good at like saying what I want to say on this either. It's a little like all over the place.
No, you're good. Yeah, I don't, for the most part, I don't see a place for, what you put it, syllogisms, right? In terms of evangelism, or really in doing theology either. I don't think that's part of it. It's a very particular part of apologetics, which is not really sort of within the bounds of systematic theology, which is what I'm trained in and interested in. And then, of course, I'm a pastor too. And so, like, walking through people through the Kalam is just never a thing that happens. It never happens. And it's not part of my conception of what witness is either. I do think that as far as philosophy and logic go, it's always good to be trying to be as precise and clear in your thinking and speaking as you can be, and thinking critically about all the, like, that's of course part of talking about God, right? But it's not what gets you to the truth about God. I think for Christians, it's not something that, for me, I don't think talking somebody into belief in God or something like that is really ever that effective. At least I haven't come across that.
I think it kind of depends on the person.
Yeah.
Something actually too I could throw out there that I've heard and I think is pretty relevant though is like, I see the role of like these type arguments more like to shoot down bad thinking or whatever. I think that's like more of the role of philosophy and stuff, when like you have an idea, like, I think God can exist because of X and X reason or whatever. Then I think philosophy has its place to be like, okay, well, that's actually like not true. Like, there is a way to logically think this through where what you're saying is not the case. But I think like positive convincing is like a different, I see a difference there. I think there's more, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that distinction was sort of what I was getting at, where using philosophy is of course going to be important, but that's a different thing than using particular arguments for for God, right? There's so much more to philosophy than that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of Christian apologists think that's just what philosophy is. That's doing philosophy, right? When I think there's just so much more in that field that we can draw from in our language, in our argumentation. So yeah.
How do you guys find that you generally convince people of Christianity being like a true belief system or something? Is it through sort of just personally engaging them and inviting them into your life? Is it through they come to you and because they want to find out and you don't, like, how does that tend to work?
Yeah, I think what you just said at the end there, that I wouldn't strike up a conversation about Jesus with someone unless I was invited to. I'm not gonna just come in swinging with that and preaching at people. Like, it's got to be within the context of some kind of established really relationship, because a lot of times, like, people don't just invite you to talk about Jesus right away. It takes a kind of trust and friendship for really difficult conversations to sort of happen in ways that are actually going to be fruitful. So I wouldn't come out swinging in that way. And I think in terms of my experience with witnessing or evangelizing or whatever you want to call it, I don't really care. I find that coming alongside people and getting to know them just for who they are is the most important thing that we can do as Jesus followers, more so than saying the right things about Jesus. I think the how is more important than the what, to be honest. The how really is. And I think that's what Christians, I would hope, would be emphasizing in their the way that they witness to the gospel. So I would say through relationships has been the most quote unquote effective thing, but it's not really effective a lot of the time. Like I'm still I'm friends with so many people that I've had these sorts of conversations with about Jesus and talking to them about Jesus, and it doesn't do anything. And that's like I don't stop being their friend. The question I think we need to ask when we're going into an evangelizing situation is, will we continue to be this person's friend if they don't convert? And if you can answer that question with yes, I will, then I think there's something to that. I think there's the right motivation and posture there, in how you're interacting with someone. So
yeah, I really
that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. I think, and I'm like, if someone's not interested in becoming a Christian, there's nothing I'm gonna do to convince them or whatever. And even if I were to especially so I just don't see that, and I just think my place is to be someone that, like, if they are interested, someone that they could talk to, and that's really my thing. I want to be open that I'm a Christian and stuff like that, but I think being pushy is only negative. I don't really see any place for being like, you're gonna go to hell, which I don't even believe that, so it's pretty hard for me to say that, but
I'm involved in homeless outreach, which we do a lot of evangelism, and the way we do it is like we offer them food and some resources, and then we just simply say, would you like for us to pray with you? And if they say yes, then we pray for them and can kind of share Christ. And if they say no, well then totally cool. I mean, and here's the resources. And so and I also think like different people have different gifts and ways that they can present Christ. And so I think each individual has like a unique gift and way that they can present Christ.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about because I'm obviously preaching on Sunday on John 1:43-51, which is where Jesus is calling Philip and Nathaniel there, and he comes up to Philip, says, "Follow me." Philip just does it sort of spontaneously, and then Philip goes to Nathaniel and is like, "I've found the guy that our scriptures are sort of pointing toward," and like tries to sort of explain to him that this is what's happening. Nathaniel's not impressed at all and is like, I don't, like, nothing good can come out of Nazareth. What are you talking about? This isn't clearly this isn't the guy, right? It's only when Jesus encounters him and when Philip says, "Come and see," he doesn't continue on trying to convince him that this is the guy. He says, "Come and see." I think there's something invitational in terms of what Christians are doing too when we do engage in those conversations is not like kind of emphasize explaining things in the precise right way. I think some of it is asking people to come and see and come be involved in work that the church is doing and all of that, and just see if something happens. I don't know.
Yeah, from a Christian point, I think like there's a huge role in like the drawing of the Holy Spirit for that.
Yeah, for sure. And just like being invitational is big too, because there are people out there that like maybe are interested but like just don't like either know it, like know that they're as interested as they are, or like they just don't feel comfortable joining. So creating like a environment kind of like what you're talking about, Travis, like I think that's super good. That's like, if somebody does want in, you wouldn't want them to feel like, oh, I would like to get to know some Christians or join a church or something, but everybody seems so like cliquey or whatever. Can be a big problem.
Right.
But as far
I
as
found
like,
the best way. Yeah, I found the best way practically is just maybe offer. Would you like me to pray with you, or if you're going, I would like love to pray with you, and then that kind of opens the door, but not in a pushy kind of way.
for sure.
I remember when I was a Christian, I'd go into Manchester to the library, for example, to study, and on my way there, I'd get some food and I'd give that food to like some homeless people,
Sure.
and then afterwards I'd be like, "Oh, do you want to pray or whatever?" And I have no idea if they actually did or not, but like now when I reflect back on that, I think them being in the position they're in, they probably felt really awkward. Like, this person who'd just given them something was like, "Oh, do you want to pray?" So they probably just went like, "Yeah," anyway, but thought it was kind of like a bit weird the whole way through. So maybe they didn't. Maybe they were genuinely like, "Oh, something nice happened," and normally people don't hear. I have no idea because I don't have access to their heads, but I do wonder how much. Like, I know if I was in that position, for example, I'd probably feel a bit awkward and compelled to do it by the fact this person had like done something nice for me, right? And it'd be like, "Oh no,"
And you
sorry,
feel
but
obligated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that concern for sure. Yeah.
I haven't really seen that too much. They're pretty. I think it's in the way you go about it. I would just offer it casually in passing, but not. You want to be careful that you're not like forcing it, but that it's like, it's organic and kind of fits the situation.
Yeah, it's definitely like a fine line for sure. Because it's like if you're with a ministry where like you do recognize that the reason, like a compelling reason to do good things like that is because like we feel like we're called to do these things, and like we see like the Christian mentality of like caring for people who are down and stuff like is part of our motivation. So to not share that with people, like why we're doing it, to like keep that hidden, like is, I don't think is a good thing. But then again, you're right, you don't want to be like pushy or whatever, and like,
Yeah,
oh,
because as
if you're not a Christian, you shouldn't show up to this and get food, even though you're homeless or whatever. And then yeah, that could be an issue. And hello, Morningstar. I definitely didn't mean to like ignore you last time, but I have terrible ADD. So if I didn't finish my sentence, I definitely would have forgot what I was gonna say. But yeah, if you just kind of want to introduce yourself, you've never been on the channel, and I don't think we've interacted much or at all. So yeah, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, we can continue the conversation, if you don't mind. Or maybe you're away from your mic.
I think they're muted.
Hold on, I've got my YouTube open as well. So I'm
Okay.
to
You're good.
once.
You're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say until you jump in more, until like I think our responses that we just gave are different than a lot of Christians would say, though.
Well, some of it, at least for me, comes from the confidence that I have in God reconciling the cosmos to God's self and including everyone in that loving embrace ultimately. And that's what's motivating me to engage with people and to witness to that, what I think is that truth about reality and about who God thinks they are. And it's not to kind of persuade someone to get saved, right? I think that's where everybody's going ultimately, and I can trust that God is going to draw them in that way. And so that in a sense, I feel kind of free to make mistakes when evangelizing, to not sort of take myself too seriously in it either, and just try to be the best sort of example of Christ for people. I don't know. There is a kind of freedom there, I think.
Yeah, and see with me, like with outreach and certain things. That's what I feel called to do, and like that's like the ministry that like I want to really put my life in. So it's a little different with me because like that's something I specifically like want to do for the rest of my Christian life. That particular type.
Yeah, I think for sure. Like as I've been learning more about like like ultimate reconciliation or something. I'm gonna stop using the term universalism. I just think it's too much of a loaded term or whatever. But like, I've always been convinced, like since first becoming a Christian, that like even whatever the outcome is, like I can tell you, I know for a fact that there's not going to be anybody that ends up in hell because like I presented the kalam incorrectly or whatever. You know, like that's not the way it's going to work out. However, I do tend to hold to like a universalism for everybody, but like I said, in the end, like if there are some people who do reject God ultimately or whatever, then like that's what's meant to be or whatever. I don't like you, but I just don't think that like I don't think my place is like convince someone, but I do think like sometimes God does use us. Like people have been convinced and become Christians because of like the worst arguments in the world sometimes. And like I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, you know, like God can use anything he wants to like achieve his means or whatever. So like if you feel called to share the gospel with somebody, then that's what you should do for sure. I don't think there's like anything wrong with it, and if they want to hear it and they're interested, then it's definitely a good thing. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like I was a little rambly, but yeah, it's kind of my thoughts. And maybe Morningstar, you might be here to introduce yourself now. And I don't know if Nathan has any more thoughts on kind of what we're getting at. I think he's having like a debate about the contingency argument or something like that in the chat right now. I wasn't really keeping up.
It's just like a general. I don't think that deductively there's going to be any way to get to a conclusion that God exists from neutral premises. Like if I am a naturalist, or I'm a theist, right, and I'm talking to a naturalist, and I want to show them that God exists in some way. If I'm going to deductively reason to something that says God exists, there's going to be some premise in there that contains something to do with God existing. There's no way to get that out of the art. That's not the way deductive logic works. So the naturalist, okay, if he accepted both premises, he would be in trouble, but you're guaranteed that he's not going to accept both premises. Right. Yep. Because so that I just think it's not a good way. I think it's not a good way of having these types of discussions. Like you're just guaranteed that if someone is a naturalist, they're going to reject one of the premises, and then it's like, okay, well, here's a modus tollens argument for that premise, and it's like, well, again, they're going to reject that. It's like, how are you going to get there from a neutral starting point? And I just never see that happening in these discussions. I think a better way is for people to like take a step back and just evaluate as like theories what people are putting forward as like an explanation. And maybe like theists would say, and I don't think the theist always loses out. I think theistic explanations are going to be more, they're going to have more stuff in, right, than like a natural one. But they're not, you might say they're a better fit to the data because of like the way human experiences or something like that, in a way that I don't think it's just that's not the only thing that you're taking into consideration when you're like weighing up these theories. It's not just like which one has the most entities. Maybe there's some part of it that you think needs to be explained by certain kinds of entities. But I mean, people saying it's false, it's just not true. Like that is how deductive logic works. Look at Lewis Carroll's short story, what the hare said to Achilles, or what the tortoise said to Achilles, even about this kind of, and John Stuart Mill's 8 books on the systems of logic. Deductive logic, it just is. It's not yielding new knowledge. You're just reformulating the relations between things you've already said.
The term for it is truth preserving, and that's what makes a logically valid argument, if it keeps the truth that was there before. So I think a lot of the work in these kind of arguments is going to have to go in justifying the premises. And that's where things get a lot harder.
I think, Nathan, you said that there is something about the initial premises that are going to be in the conclusion of a theist argument. And I think that explains a lot of why these arguments are only really convincing to other theists who who run similar arguments. A lot of the time they're just sort of tweaking other arguments and sort of changing premises a bit, and then they become convincing to that. But it's never really convincing to anyone else who's sort of outside of that in a different discourse, right? But it does sort of reaffirm for a lot of people the truth that they're already committed to, and that's not good. It's not a helpful intellectual endeavor, I don't think.
I mean, like, I think because I was thinking about this as I was saying it, like, say in maths or something, right? Like, there's proofs of things that I'm not aware of, but because I already accept like certain parts of maths, I can learn more about maths by like following through like a deductive system of logic to prove certain things that I didn't sort of understand. You know, like I wasn't aware that root 2 couldn't be expressed as a rational number or something at one point, but then just by using the rules of inference about certain things I already knew in maths, I could like see that and figure it out. Now, maybe it is the case that, I don't know, I don't think that people... I just can't see how you could get there from neutral premises that don't already, you know, and I think even if you did, so like, let's say someone's like an atheist, right? And you did get to the conclusion that God exists. Well, all they're going to do is just work the argument the opposite way and show that one of the premises must be wrong because the conclusion is false. So it's a losing game in terms of the discourse, I think. It's like, if the very thing in discussion, is going to be like I'm already committed for whatever reason to the position that root 2 is a rational number, right? And then I'm just going to show that there's something wrong with some of your axioms because that's the very thing that we're talking about in the first place. I can't really see a way out of it. I don't think anyone really is convinced by... I think it does work in that way where if you're already believing something, then it helps you to figure out more or something. But I don't think you're getting there from an outsider's point of view, just off of like two premises and a conclusion.
Yeah, I think so. I see some people in the chat saying that they were brought into Christianity because of arguments, or at least theism. And yeah, that very well, I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to say, no, you're wrong about your experience. What I would say is, I worry a little bit about where those arguments get us in terms of the God being depicted through those arguments, because when we're talking about Christianity specifically, we're talking about a God who was a crucified Jew, who lived in the first century, right? Like that's a long way away from the sorts of sort of abstract gods that are being reasoned toward through these sorts of arguments. And that's where I get a little bit kind of twitchy, is like, I just don't know how that connection, like, sure, you can sort of philosophically be convinced that this theistic God is real, true. Where's the connection between that and the central affirmation of the Christian faith, which is that Jesus is God incarnate, two natures in that single subject, right? That's where I struggle to see the people making that connection, because what tends to happen is if all of your theological work is done and philosophical work is done to get to this abstract God over here, you're gonna have to try to fit Jesus into that prior conception of who God is, just by virtue of it being the foundation that you've arrived at, right? They can't sort of come together cleanly. That initial discovery is going to be the controlling account of God, right? So that's kind of what I worry about when I think that Jesus, as Christians, needs to be the controlling account of who God is, and not any sort of other abstract conception of deity outside of that. So that's where I get a little bit worried.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. So I don't know as much philosophy as like you guys and a lot of people, but like as I started to learn it, I just like wasn't super interested. And so I knew, but like, not saying because I'm not interested it's stupid or whatever. I'm like the arbiter of what's cool or whatever. But I just started looking at it, like thinking about it differently or whatever. And I thought it was very enlightening. Except like just the other day, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago or whatever. But Rob Coons was on Adherent Apologetics. He did a live stream, and Rob Coons is like a very highly respected analytic Christian philosopher or whatever. And he was talking for like over an hour all about the contingency argument, the PSR, and all this stuff, and how it gets you to this necessary being. And then there's like the gap problem, which takes you to God. and gets you to this like super abstract sounding. And I asked a question. I was like, so how does this so how do we know that this necessary being is Jesus, a crucified Jew in the first century? And he's like, oh, that's way downstream. That's way. And I'm just like, as soon as I heard that, I'm like, these arguments are pointless, because like that is not the way Paul talks in the Bible at all. Like, you don't just, like you said, you fit Jesus into this. And I don't think as Christians that's like at all how we should be arguing. So I'm not saying like I like don't think they work, because I don't know enough. Like, I can't argue to say somebody can use philosophy better than me, and I wouldn't be able to prove to them that I don't think they work or whatever, or maybe they do or don't. That is what it is. But I just don't see, like, I don't see the motivation to like focus on that as Christians or whatever. And I just and then I see these debates where they're just like never ending. It seems like Graham Oppie did a debate, and he just like with Andrew Loke or whatever, and then he just like basically like, we're not gonna go over this argument because all we're going to do is argue about this premise, and you're going to come up with an argument to justify this premise, and then I'm just going to deny it, and you're just going to come up with another argument to justify the premises in that argument, and it's just an infinite regress all the way down. And so I just don't see like where we're getting with these. But like that's kind of where I'm at when it comes to these things. And I think Morningstar might have something to say here. I've been cutting them off.
Paul actually does seem to think that we can know about God from the natural world. When you go to Romans 1, he seems to be saying that people who don't know Jesus can still come to know God naturally from the things that are created. And this would seem to be some kind of endorsement of natural theology as something separate from understanding Christianity or any other specific religion. I think that a way of developing metaphysical knowledge in an objective way, that it can't just be denied with equal reasonableness, is what the person who's trying to make an argument of philosophy of religion needs, so that we can actually have a more genuine discussion about the premises of theistic arguments.
Yeah, I think the appeal to Romans 1:18 to 32 is a tricky one for a couple of reasons. One, it's the only place that we have Paul saying that you can have natural knowledge of God. It's the one text. That's it. The other times that Paul talks about knowing God he uses apocalypsis language, so revelation. He's talking about as a revelation of God in Jesus Christ that comes under the control of Jesus Christ. That's where knowledge of God fundamentally comes from. Now, in Romans 1:18 to 32 and the following discussion, I think there probably is something else going on there rhetorically, and biblical scholars have pointed this out too, that Paul's possibly, what's that?
This is just the guy in the chat who's saying you should read Timothy McGrew's work, and it's like, what the hell do I spend my time? Sorry to interrupt, though. I had a question for what you were saying, John, as well, and
Sure.
I can wait if you want to finish what you were saying, though, because.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that I think Romans 1 to 3 is doing something different rhetorically than I think a lot of people think it's doing. I think Paul's setting up somebody else's position, Romans 1:18 to 32, and then going on to respond to it and ultimately sort of deconstruct. It's sort of a reductio ad absurdum in Romans 2. This is a huge discussion that would take hours to actually walk you through. But just for now, there are other ways to handle Romans 1 and following without committing Paul to natural theology or natural law.
Right.
What do you? I thought it was interesting when you said this is just a general point about theology, I guess. When you said it, he only says it in this one place. Like, what does that show you? Because I guess I'm thinking from like maybe like a really high view of scripture, that like if it's in the Bible, right, then it, like everything is inspired. This is like propositional statements about truth or whatever. Like, what does it show you that it only appears once? What does that infer in, like, you're making this like systematic theology or whatever?
Sure, good question.
Maybe before you get started, we can just let Erin say hello or whatever. She just jumped in.
Hi.
So hello.
Hey.
Sorry it took so long. My other computer wasn't on. And I don't know how to turn it on, so I had to get my laptop.
You're fine.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at how Paul is understanding knowledge of God, we have to look at the spread of data that we have. And when we do that, we can see a pattern of how Paul speaks about knowledge of God. It comes up in all sorts of ways in relation to Jesus, and Jesus revealing God, people coming into relationship with God by confessing, sort of 1 Corinthians 8, confessing the Shema in this sort of new Jesus-y way, where Jesus is sort of included in the Shema in Romans 8, in 1 Corinthians 8. And when we see that spread, and especially when it's located in some of Paul's deepest theological commitments of being in Christ. So it's dependent upon finding a center in Paul, which I'm kind of I was presupposing when I was saying that it shows up in one place. To me, that indicates, since I had the center of Paul that I think does the most heavy lifting for him theologically throughout his letters, when I see something like Romans 1 and see that this is the only sort of real exception to knowledge of God being somewhere outside of Jesus Christ, that's throwing up a flag for me, because it seems to be the exception to what I think is the rule in Paul. So it's already kind of weird to me. And then going back to Romans 1-3 and being like, is there another way to actually handle this stuff that allows Paul to speak consistently about God and about Jesus Christ? And yeah, I think there is a better way to handle it. So that's what was kind of going on behind me saying there's only one time right. He talks about God and Jesus. But yeah, as far as the inspiration point, or the idea that God,
I think that's sort of, it's like how. Sorry, yeah, my apologies for interrupting. I just want to clarify. Like, I guess it's like if it's inspired. Like, from my point of view, it's like, I could see how there might be these like tensions in interpreting and stuff like that if it's like a human document, which is how I view it. But then I'm like, if it's inspired, I somehow think, well, maybe it should be clearer that these contradictions aren't there or something, or that, you know, Paul isn't like saying something else broadly, and then in this place he seems to be like, I don't know. Are you looking at inspiration like differently though, to like the way that I'm assuming it should be?
I'm not an inerrantist. I'm also not I don't even really like talking about the text as inspired necessarily, as if it's this sort of static thing that has some sort of inspiration kind of dumped into it, right? I think these because we're dealing with documents that have been sort of shifting and adjusting and changing for years and years and years, right? That's just not what it is. It's not the static text. And I agree with you that fundamentally this is a human book. Yeah, 100%. And that's why I'm comfortable with making sort of different moves on the text than I think somebody who has a view of inerrancy, which I would say is quite a recent development in the history of Christian theology. But people who sort of buy into that approach kind of struggle with some of the things I say about handling difficult texts in somebody like Paul. I do think that the scriptures are important because it's the book of the church. It gives us the language and sort of categories to speak about. I like to think about it more in terms of encyclopedia of language to talk about God. It's also a wonderful witness to Jesus Christ from varying human perspectives. It's a wonderful witness to Jesus. But yeah, I like to think about it more in terms of language
but
for Christians. Yeah,
just specifically like this whole like Romans 1-3 or whatever, like this really even kind of has nothing to do with that, but like you could disagree with you on inerrancy and stuff, but still like you could hold to inerrancy. And if you saw like someone say, I wrote you an inerrant letter or whatever, and I kept saying like, I think you're so smart, and all of a sudden like one of them says like, I think you're dumb or whatever, you would be like, wait, like what's going on? And I think you're just saying that like this is different, so it causes me to look and like figure out why is this different. And so it's like Not that.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying about inerrancy is relevant or whatever, but you could have a different view, but still think that like Romans 1-3 is someone else's position or whatever, and still hold to the same reason.
Oh, sure.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of all I'm getting at. Like the reason you look deeper at it, or the reason you think twice because this is like the only place you see it, is not just because you're okay with not holding to inerrancy. It's just because like if somebody said something over and over and over again and then they seem to say it differently, it would cause you to think twice, like why did they bring that up differently?
Yeah, and let me clarify about that, because it's not just different, it's it fundamentally clashes with Paul's Paul's commitments elsewhere to the to knowledge of God, because in the opening of Romans you have people basically looking at the cosmos and deducing from the cosmos that there's a God who is really pissed off at them and basically wants to kill them by the end of Romans 1:18-32. So it's beginning with the human person deriving self-evident truths about God from nature. Okay? Paul says elsewhere, the truth about God is a revelation of Jesus Christ that comes under the control of Jesus Christ, right? It's coming from God as a gift of grace. It's not something you discover by means of looking at the cosmos and sort of rationalizing from there, oh, there's a God and it's Jesus Christ, right? Those are two fundamentally different ways of doing knowledge of God. One works, quote unquote, forward in terms of its logic, right? It starts with the human person deducing from nature the self-evident truths. The other one is backward. It's more of a retrospective, sort of a posteriori account of knowledge. Comes from God as a gift of grace to you. You don't discover it. You don't do anything to control it. It comes to you from God. So that's why that is a weird difference, is because it does clash fundamentally with what Paul says 99% of the time about knowledge of God. So
these passages seem to be talking about different things. So when we go to Romans 1:20, we see that Paul is talking about the invisible attributes of God, his power and his divine nature. This is different from Christianity and Jesus, as far as I can see. So I really don't see how they contradict. We could know some things about God through the natural world and further things about God through revelation. Overall, they just seem to be talking about different things.
So they're not talking about the same guy, same God.
They're talking about the same God. They're talking about different things about the same God.
So how do you know that they're the same guy, same God?
Sorry?
How do we know for sure that they're talking about the same God?
Well, Paul was a monotheist. He thought there was one God. And he's saying that we can know that God is all-powerful and he has certain other attributes. Okay.
You might want to stop that.
Yeah, that's
Ethan,
yeah,
or you'll get taken down off YouTube.